All right, folks, welcome back. I hope everyone had a good break. Feeling refreshed, feeling ready? Now I am going to wait just a tiny bit. We are still missing one GRC member. So I'll give a little bit of time for her to come back. We'll give just a minute, and then if not, we're still at quorum, so we can continue on. Oh, perfect. All right. I think we can go ahead and get started. So just to remind everyone, we are back in the world of mental health courts. And Judge Kitson McCadish, we are going to start right now with Lynn County Mental Health Court. And again, we are kind of finishing off. There's a couple more of that kind of middle standard information, kind of that middle bucket. So we'll go ahead and get started. So for Lynn County Mental Health Court, their scorecard score was 83%. They had a narrative score of 27, and they had spent 36% of their budget down by the end of Q7. We'll flip on over to their recommendations.
Can you go back just 1 second there?
Of course.
On the graph, is that because this is a brand new court?
It is. Yes.
Okay.
Great eyes. Yes, they are.
Thank you.
Very new, of course. And I do want to note around the feedback for eliminating the use of incarceration. There was again, a discrepancy. The narrative states that kind of said they were, the SCOP said no, so we just put that feedback on there just to make sure that they had
it. You mentioned this is a brand new court?
They were an implementation court in 23-25. And so this is their first round in the main grant, the big grant.
And that's what I remember. I remember them in the implementation phase, but when you mentioned new court, I had to follow up. Thank you.
Yeah, no, of course.
I think it's already noted in your evaluate eligibility criteria, but the thing I noticed was they stated that some mental health courts only accept participants in county, but didn't specifically identify what they do. And I found that similar kind of narrative when reading through it. Sometimes it felt like there's a lot of information, but it was hard to kind of tie it to their narrative of how they use the things or do the things. So like it sounds like they have a lot of great ideas and things that they're implementing, but it was for me reading it a little harder to kind of tie it together. And then the other thing I noticed, they listed, it was a little confusing figuring out what assessment tools they used. But I think that's also on here. For the use of a risk assessment tool. Yeah, it was unclear to me what tools they were using here.
We had similar questions, and yes, which is why that feedback is on here as well.
I had a question about the drug testing. It kind of sounded like if there's no history of drug use, they weren't doing any drug testing. And I thought grant-wise, they still had to continue to have testing regardless of whether there was a history.
That is correct. That should be what they're doing. So what we can do is we can make sure that that feedback regarding drug testing, again, I hope no one gets dizzy. I'm going to go back for just a second. Yeah, we can go back and just really make sure, because they did not meet that standard for the drug testing standard. So we'll just make sure that that feedback is on there as well,
Great.
if it's not already. Any other feedback, questions, anything for Lynn County Mental Health Court? All right, then again, Melissa, this might be kicking you out. Remind me for Crook County. All right, catch you on the flip side. All right, so for Crook County Mental Health Court, their scorecard was 79%. They had a narrative score of 32. And prior to this, in the last biennium, they combined the two, their mental health court and their adult drug court were combined in one grant application. It was one, they got funding as one. So now they're separated. So we don't have any spending specific to the mental health court, if that makes sense. So not a new court in the sense that their court has been around for some time, but new to funding from us. And just a heads up too, this again is going to be one, this is starting our final bucket for the mental health courts. So this has a little more additional information. So their completion rate was 33%, average participation of 4, and their capacity is 12.
I thought the judge was very interactive with the participants on this one. My notes, it says that they did push-up challenges, step contests, and music discussions.
Absolutely. Any other clarification needed? Feedback, recommendations? All right. Well, with that, we're going to move on over to Marion. Melissa, we hope you'll come back to us. So Marion's mental health court, their scorecard score was 79%. They had a 32 on their narrative score, and they've spent about 66% of their funds at the end of Q7. They have a 60% completion rate with an average participation of 20 and a capacity of 30. Right, and I'm seeing a couple thumbs. Did we have any feedback for Marion? Any clarification needed? All right, we're motoring then. We will continue on. Kelsey, I think you're going to have to turn off for this one. Union County's Mental Health Court. Their scorecard score was 79% with a narrative of 32, and they had spent a little bit below half, 49% of their funds by the end of Q7. They have a 50% completion rate with the average participation of 10 and the capacity of 10. And I do want to note on this one in particular, oops, I'm going to go back for just a second for my notes. They were still below the 55% average on the completion rate, but they had increased from 25% last time. So still not quite meeting that standard, but definitely a huge increase from before.
And they're aware of their spending or lack thereof.
They are, yes. We have talked about it. They were one of the courts that declined the final distribution of funds as well. So they're working on it.
Oh, good. Thank you for that.
Yeah, of course. All right, seeing a couple thumbs. Again, last call for Union. Let me check over here to see who's next. All right. And Multnomah County Mental Health Court had a scorecard score of 76%, a narrative score of 30, and they had spent 58% of their budget by the end of Q7. They have a completion rate of 58%, average participation of 91, which is over their capacity of 80. All right. Any other feedback for Multnomah's mental health court? All right. Next up, we have Yamhill County's mental health court. They had a scorecard score of 72% and a narrative score of 28. They've spent 71% of their budget by the end of Q7. They have a 50% completion rate, an average participation of 10, and no capacity limit.
This isn't really I'll just ask it. I noticed they had a problem with UA monitoring having a contract, which we see a lot, but I don't recall that being a part of the other Yamhill treatment court. And I know they're separate courts, but that's just an interesting kind of observation. I would hope they would be able to collaborate on something like that, because that is a really difficult one to manage.
We can look back and double check and see if anyone else mentioned it or what it says on the scorecard. Don't remember offhand, but we can definitely see if that was the case for all of them or if this is something specific to their mental health court.
I had noted UAs were a need for the adult drug courts there as well, but I'm not sure if you down there more than that. I can't remember.
We have reviewed a lot, so they kind of do run together a little bit.
Yes, a little bit for sure. Well, we'll double check, and if they are missing that feedback, we can absolutely add it to it. I know that they did receive, and maybe, yeah, they do need to put the UAs in SCMS, but we can double check on the drug testing as well. While we check on that, are we okay to move forward? All right. Next up is Clackamas County's Mental Health Court. They had a scorecard score of 69%, a narrative score of 24, and they've spent 47% of their funds by the end of Q7. 48% completion rate, an average participation of 36, and a capacity of 60. Yeah, Joe, go ahead.
Excuse me. We've seen this in a few applications in terms of provide services to participants whose preferred language is not English. So is that going to be is that like a technical assistance thing that they can work with, I don't know, CJC or someone to make sure that they have those services accessible?
Yeah.
Or some, like, how's that going to work? So
Yeah, it is tied to the standards. So that could, and I'm not saying this is what you want to do. I'm just saying these are options. It could look like making sure that they receive funding for translators to make sure that all of their documents are translated into multiple languages. It could look like making sure that they have language line available. It could be making sure that they have interpreters available. Also, I do want to note that this is one that, again, we erred on the side of giving more feedback. And so there were a couple courts, and I don't remember if Clackamas was one of them. There were a couple courts that there was a discrepancy between what the scorecard said and what they said in their narrative. So I think for this one, it was both, that they weren't getting information out in any language other than English. But again, I just want to be clear that we covered it in case for everyone.
How do
I
you
appreciate that. Thank you.
Sorry. How do you address their loss of probation and parole commitment?
Sorry, you kind of broke up. Can you ask that again?
Yeah, how do you address their loss of probation and parole commitment?
I think, are you asking like ways that we could like recommend funding for them?
Yeah, where would that be in the best practice standard? And then to show that that's something they need to work on. I'm sure they're aware of it, but to gain PNP support again.
Yeah, so I think that could tie into a couple different standards, right? This has to do with like your staffing piece. This has to do, I think, with your like, what am I trying to say here? Your structure of the court, right? It's tied to that. So we can definitely tie it in there as needed. I do know that they are aware and they're working on it. And then when it comes to, again, when it comes to the funding piece, this could be something that, you know, they decide like, hey, you gave us this feedback, so we need to put more money towards hiring, right? Or something like that. Does that answer your question? I feel like I might be around it. Okay.
On the previous page, it talked about the time it takes to get people enrolled, but I don't recall seeing that in the application itself. What can you give us information about what the concern is there?
Sure. Sorry, I'm wondering if it's my computer again. Sorry, can you repeat just the first part of that again?
On the previous page, it said number 3, the getting them properly placed into the program.
Oh, okay. Okay. So that's tied to eligibility. So that could be we can pull up we can look behind the scenes at their scorecard, but that typically is tied to maybe they're not using the correct risks tool. They don't have them, they haven't used it yet, or they're using it at the wrong time, something like that.
Okay, that makes more sense. Thank you.
Any other questions, concerns, feedback? All right, and we're going to take just a second. Let me orient myself down here. All right. All right, so that's it for mental health court. So we'll get a little more details about the question you asked about Clackamas, but in the meantime, we're going to invite Rachel back to talk a little bit more about trends in family treatment court. Oops.
Hello, everybody.
I'm so sorry, Rachel. Do you mind if I interrupt you? That was
Please.
rude. I invite you and then I interrupt you. So I did hear, so back to the folks at Clackamas Mental Health, they are not meeting on when they are using the risk tool or screening or on their eligibility criteria. So hopefully that answers that question. All right, Rachel, take it away.
Back to FTCs. Okay. So this is, I think, probably one we're seeing the trends is most significant for everybody. We currently have 12 family treatment courts in our state, which is incredible. We've had kind of an explosion over the last several years, notably again since the last time that we were all gathered together. And we've had 6 new family treatment courts launch. One specifically was more of a revamp, but very much was a come offline, rebuild, go back up. So we have had great expansion with our family treatment courts, doubling since 2023. So that most definitely speaks to this very strong upward trend that you're seeing with the participation. And I would add to that, in consulting with our team's family treatment court analyst, Justine Kilsby, she noted that of these new programs are also, some of them are pretty small right now because they're still in kind of their infancy phases, just getting launched. So these populations are probably quite small, and we can expect, I think, to see these trends continue likely into the next biennium of that kind of upward expansion to the census that's served overall. So I'm looking at my notes on the side here, and I think that that is all I needed to say on that. I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right. Are there any questions for Rachel before we get into our next group courts? All right, let's pop on in. So again, here's going to be our buckets, our breakdown of the information you'll receive on the analysis. So you can see them there. And we're going to go ahead and start with Marion County. Their scorecard score was 96%. They had a narrative score of 27. And by the end of Q7, they had spent 63% of their budget. All right, seeing a couple thumbs. Any feedback for them? Yeah, Julie.
I did notice that they had asked for some technical assistance around maybe making staffing more efficient. I don't know if training or something wanted to be added.
Yeah, so with that request, any request that we receive for technical assistance was passed on to Rachel and her team at OJD, since that's their lane, if you will. But yes, we noted that and passed that on to them so that they could connect and go forward with that, because there were a couple courts that did that. And our next one, I believe, is Lincoln. So Connie, we're going to say goodbye for just a brief minute. Their scorecard score was 93%. They had a narrative score of 29, and they had spent about 34% of their budget by the end of Q7.
And they have a plan in place for their spending?
They do, to my knowledge. There have been a couple, they're aware of it. They're aware that they're on the low side.
Thank you.
It is noted here, but the inclusion of criminal cases in it was unusual for family treatment courts. That is not something that most any other, I don't think, family treatment courts do. Yeah.
And I think I will offer the floor up to those who could maybe explain this a little bit better, but their situation is a tiny bit unique because of how they do their courts are combined. I want to say I'm sort of looking helplessly at Rachel Mark for help on this, right? Because it's their measure 50. I'm just going to let you talk about it.
Happy to do so. And excellent observation. Great question. I think that, yes. So generally speaking, family treatment courts are housed in the dependency system. We do recognize that some communities also have this kind of overlap with people who are involved in the dependency system that also have criminal court cases. And so there's these kind of dueling processes that may happen along the way. So there is, I think, Lincoln, to kind of best streamline their resources and manage their varying kind of community needs, they have kind of tried to carve out multiple paths to serve people accordingly. And this has been an area they're giving a lot of attention to make sure that people are kept separately and that they're monitoring the right kind of ethical lines that need to be considered in all of those spheres. This does not translate over to the Measure 57 piece. This is a singular program kind of point and really about just making sure that they have the best services available for parents who are involved in the justice system that also have dependency cases or children involved with child welfare.
Thank you, Rachel. That was much nicer than listening to me bungle it, for sure. Handy to have an expert. Any other questions, clarification needed, etc.? All right, then we will move on. Next up, we have Grant, their family treatment court. They have a scorecard score of 93%, a narrative score of 26, and they had spent 47% of their funds by the end of Q7. And this is, again, moving in kind of to that middle bucket. So I'm going to keep on over here to the recommendations. I do want to note with Harney and Grant, they did use 23 to 25 feedback and are now meeting on staff attendance and the training. Those points on the scorecard, still not meeting though on the UAs.
As with all our other Eastern or rural communities, that's very hard. And I did notice their detox and residential treatment centers are 130 miles away, which is, not something they control, of course, but is definitely a concern for a court like this. Well, any court.
Yeah, their closest are here in Deschutes County.
Adeline, do you know what a navigation specialist is? They referred to that in their report a few times.
I do have kind of a baseline understanding, but I'm wondering if for the purpose of giving you maybe a little more detail, I wonder if Rachel wants to speak on it.
On a navigation specialist?
Mm-hmm.
You know what? I don't want to speculate too much because I don't know officially what that is in Grant Harney. But I think it's more of a peer related case management kind of support person who is working directly with the individual, not the probation officer or child welfare worker treatment provider. It's more of the boots on the ground alongside of them kind of person. But I would definitely want Grant Harney to explain a little more tangibly what they're doing with that role in their community.
And we definitely can request that as secondary feedback. I don't know if you all have seen the final application piece yet, but there is a chunk there that asks for further clarification. So if you'd like, we can absolutely add that chunk since it does tie back to those standards.
Understanding we talked about the drug testing processes. I didn't see where they mentioned trying to improve that, or they have a plan in place to improve that. Did I miss something on that in their application?
It does say GRC identification of cases number 5 and 8 have been met with increased drug testing. But I think that's the only thing I saw in there.
They didn't really speak to how they were mitigating that or how they were changing it. Yeah, Joe.
This kind of broader question, but I remember this application actually got me thinking about it. So in eligibility criteria, they require someone who has a medical marijuana card to discontinue the use of medical marijuana. Is that consistent with the current standards or not? I actually can't recall. So maybe that's a Rachel question.
It is.
Love this question. This is a really tough one, and I'm actually going to punt because I would always ask Sam Dupree, our general counsel person on the treatment court team, to talk about kind of the policy side of this. It's frankly quite gray. But I will say, generally speaking, when it comes to who we let in and are willing to serve in our programs, we are very clear of let's make sure that the ADA is not being violated when we're setting some of our limits, and really are kind of leaning on laws related to who we're serving on that front, recognizing that medical marijuana isn't quite in that category, but it's got some protections. Hashtag it's complicated. So I would say, please let me ask Sam Dupree if he can offer some more guidance specifically on that we can share around to this committee.
That might be helpful. Just generally, just so folks know. I mean, I remember on one of the cleanup bills, and again, I'm drawing a blank. It's been a long week and a half. There was language specific around where federal and state law conflicts were required to follow state law. So I don't know how applicable that is to eligibility criteria for a treatment court, but it's just one of those things where I know how gray it can be, but I think that's some of what that intention was. So I just don't know how it applies to our programs across the board. And this actually made me think of it when I reviewed the application. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
That's a great question. And with that one, if you all are comfortable, what I could do is we can let Rachel and Sam let OJD talk to their legal counsel. And then I can send an email with that information if that works for all of you, since that one's a little bit not specific to a specific court, right? And just so we know going forward.
And please apologize to Sam on my behalf, Rachel. Thank you.
All right. Any other feedback, questions, clarity needed from Harney Grant before we move on? All right. So let's hop on over to Josephine. Josephine's family treatment court had a scorecard score of 89%, a narrative score of 26, and they had spent around 49% of their budget at the end of Q7.
I did appreciate their discussion around domestic violence and how they handle or are working on addressing that. I think that is one of the more difficult things in family treatment courts is there are often two parents and both may want to participate. And when there are interpersonal dynamics that make it difficult, our smaller courts really struggle. And I know Josephine has thought a lot about that, and many of the courts have. And so I appreciate their kind of upfront kind of addressing it and what they're trying to do and what they see, because it is a really challenging thing to handle.
I noted when it talks about therapeutic responses that, well, first, let me say I agree with Annie. Absolutely on domestic violence. We've experienced that as well. But then when I noticed on therapeutic response, it says if one is needed, the team uses the responses outlined in the policy and procedure manual. And I wondered if a therapeutic response should actually come from treatment, not the manual.
That is great feedback. Thank you. All right. I'm seeing a couple thumbs. Any more feedback for Josephine? All right, so we will move on next to Columbia. So we're gonna toss Julie out for just a second, but please come back to us when we're done, Julie. Columbia County's Family Treatment Court had a scorecard score of 89%, a narrative score of 24, and they had spent 68% of their funds by the end of Q7. There's their recommendation. And I do want to note that they did receive feedback on UAs in 23 to 25 and are working on a contract with a new provider. So when it comes to that weekend and holiday drug testing services, they are actively working on it.
I like that they noticed that or recognize that the return of a child to a parent, that more supports need to be provided at that time.
Any other thoughts or feedback for Columbia? Right. Then we'll go next to Wasco and Hood River counties. Their family treatment court had a scorecard score of 85%, a narrative score of 26. And again, like their other courts, they are new to us this biennium, have not received funding from us before. And so we don't have any spending information. Right, I'm seeing a couple thumbs. So we'll keep on going. Our next one, Judge Kissamakadosh, we're going to ask you to turn off. This is Lynn County's Family Treatment Court. They had a scorecard score of 78%, a narrative score of 26, and they had spent 53% of their funds by the end of Q7. I do want to note that this is starting our third and final bucket for family court, so they have some extra information again. So they have a completion rate of 45%, average participation of 16, and a capacity of 15. any feedback for Lynn County? Staff did make a note, just in appreciation of all the accommodations that they listed for the diversity in their court, including making everything at the 8th grade reading level, voice memos versus writing an essay, that kind of stuff was a really interesting take. All right, we'll pop on over to Clatsop. Their scorecard score was 70. They had a narrative score of 31. And because their family treatment court is new to us, we didn't have any spending information from them. They had a completion rate of 56%, an average participation of 7, and a capacity of 8.
I think they did a good job with their incentives and with their community partners.
All right. Any other feedback for them? Incredible. We're going to pop on over to Benton County's Family Treatment Court. They had a scorecard score of 70%, a narrative score of 27. Now, this is the first time their Family Treatment Court has joined us. It is a new court, so their completion rate is 0 as of right now, and their average participation is 0. They do have a capacity of 8, and we, of course, have no spending information for them because they're brand new.
I think for brand new courts, it's always nice to see when they come in with so much stuff kind of here. And so I do appreciate that they've clearly put in a lot of work to get here, even though they're pretty new.
Absolutely. Any other feedback for Benton County? All right. Then we'll get to Tillamook County's Family Treatment Court. They had a scorecard score of 63%, a narrative score of 18, and had spent 7% of their funds by the end of Q7. They do have a 100% completion rate, an average participation of 2, and capacity of 4.
I'm curious, it says that they had the comment where because they only have 2 judges, sometimes someone can't participate due to a judge conflict. I'm guessing that they're saying there's only a single judge, so if that client can't be in front of that judge for whatever reason, it's a conflict.
That is how staff read it as well. That is part of why we gave them the eligibility feedback, because we were also a little bit confused by that.
I'm glad you brought that up, Annie, because I noted that too. And I saw that they mentioned that they don't have a coordinator either, although I, with capacity of 4, I'm not sure what that would look like, but something they can hopefully explore as well.
They're definitely working on personnel, to my knowledge. Definitely moving folks around.
Yeah, you can tell that they're they're doing their best with what limited sources that they have. It seems like because a lot of this they're very reliant on like the DHS caseworker to do a lot of work, and that and that makes it hard on any program. So I'm hopeful they can get a coordinator or some other supports there to kind of broaden that and grow.
Anything else for Tillamook?
Is there a mention on the SCMS usage? Because I did notice that they still rely on sending out reports as opposed to reading reports. I don't know if I can't remember how the best practice is around the use of SCMS, if it's more focused on entry or if it's focused on using it. But I did notice that they tend to send things instead of having people access it directly.
Right. Let me, if I may, I'm going to go back here a little bit and just see what standards are. We will make sure that if they didn't meet that standard, they had a couple that they didn't meet for drug testing, and SCMS is within that line. So we'll double check, and if they haven't met that, we'll make sure that we add that feedback as well. Anything else for Tillamook? All right. That was our last family treatment course. So we are moving. And I just want to double check. Feels like we haven't been back that long. Do we want to keep going? Does anyone need a break? Shall we keep moving? Okay. I saw a good head nod from Connie, so we're going to do it. Rachel, would you like to tell us about trends that are happening in the juvenile drug treatment courts?
It's short and sweet for this one. We have 4 JDTCs in our state at this point. And as you can see here, the trends I'm saying are stable because they seem to have kind of at least a similar pattern at how things go. But generally speaking, it looks like they kind of continue to recover back into the 40s between some dips and some peaks along the way. So seemingly consistent-ish. And we'll learn more about each of the programs as you go on.
Thank you. Any questions for Rachel regarding juvenile courts before we get into the mix? All right, perfect. Well, now at this point, we're getting old hat at this. Here's our buckets. Only 4 this time. You'll note those buckets are getting smaller and smaller the further we get away from adult drug courts. So our first one and only one in that first bucket was Marion County's Juvenile Drug Treatment Court. They had a score of 93% on their scorecard, a 30 for their narrative score, and they've spent about 68% of their budget as of Q7. And much like their other courts, we just want to note that they addressed a lot of the feedback we gave them in 23-25 biennium, including some pretty substantial changes to drug testing. All right, I'm seeing the thumbs up from Jake. Anyone have any notes, any feedback? No? All right. Well, we'll move on then. So the next one is Washington County's Juvenile Drug Treatment Court. They have a scorecard score of 86%, a narrative score of 31, and they have spent about 76% of their funds through Q7. And you can see they're in that middle bucket, so here's the participants over time as well. And then with that, we're going to pop on over to their recommendations. All right. Thank you for those that keep giving me the thumbs up. Any feedback for Washington's juvenile drug treatment court before we move on? All right, no notes, as the youth say. All right. So the next,
Can I ask a question just about general
Always.
funds for youth treatment? I know like for adult drug court and stuff, grant funds can't be used for recreation type purposes. Is that different for juvenile courts in order to build pro-social? No. Okay.
it is not. So they are limited to the same rules, or at least from CJC funding, to be clear. So from CJC funds, we're covered by something called the GAGs, which tells us what we can and can't spend, and it's very clear that entertainment is not one of them. So, there is something to be said for, as you're saying, in all courts, not just juvenile, that pro-social approach, but it has to be very clearly something that is pro-social as opposed to something that is entertainment.
Okay, thank you.
And that's all through our grant administration guide. Right, no problem. Yamhill is up next. So we'll move on over to their recommendations as well. I do want to note for them that they, again, are another court that really utilized the feedback from that 23-25 biennium. They increased their training to a point that they are now meeting their training standard. And then again, haven't quite met those UAs and SEMS and are working still to stand up an advisory committee. But again, upward momentum on all those things. I don't know why you need a hand gesture every time I say upward momentum, but just in case you missed it. All right. Any more feedback for Yamhill? All right. We're going to carry on. Next up, we have Lane County's Juvenile Drug Treatment Court. They have a scorecard score of 75%, a narrative score of 31, and they'd spent 34% of their budget by the end of Q7. They have a 27% completion rate. 18 is their average participation and a capacity of 25. And again, by now, if you're getting that additional information, they're in that final bucket. Any feedback for Lane? All right. Perfect. Well, I cannot get over how quickly we're moving through. We're going to invite Rachel back, and she's going to talk to us a little bit about trends with our veterans treatment courts. Joe, go ahead. Real quick before Rachel starts.
Sorry, just letting you know I'll be signing off right now, and I'm assuming that the pace we're going that I won't be back by the time you guys have wrapped up. So just wanted to thank you for running a very efficient grant review process and appreciate all the work that CJC's put into this and OJD as well. So, and appreciate you, Rachel, as always. Good to see you and thank you for everything you do. So with that, I'll sign off.
Thanks so much. Definitely do try and come back. If we're still in action, you are more than welcome back. And just so everyone knows, but you included, if you do want to catch the end of the meeting, it will be available on our YouTube page. A recording of it will be. So if you want to catch the end.
All right, perfect. Thank you.
All right, take care.
Okay. Veteran treatment courts. This is an exciting one. We have an entire statewide initiative working on enhancement and expansion of our VTCs. And I say that in part because we currently have 7. If you are a stickler and you looked at my first slide with that treatment court map on it, you're going to say, Rachel, there were only 5 on there. And that's because 2 of them had asterisks next to them. They weren't yet counted. They weren't live when we published our map. They have since gone live. We have now from 5 to 7 VTCs in our state. So as you can imagine, they don't really have large populations yet. And so I'm flagging that for you. If I would expect that we'll see overall statewide trends increasing our VTC population probably by the next time that we gather. However, based on our current landscape, what we're looking at is VTCs seem to be quite stable from 2020 to now. Their population looks almost identical. And we did have 5 VTCs back in 2020 to 25 when this map was pulled. So very much look like a consistent group on that front. And I can't wait to show you new trends when we come back together in 2 years.
Thanks, Rachel. Anyone have questions about VTCs? All right, we'll keep on going then. Only 3 of those 7 that Rachel mentioned get CJC funds. And so they are bucketed here, and there's 1 in each. So should be a pretty quick little jump through Veterans Treatment Courts. So we'll start with Lane County. Their VTC, or Veterans Treatment Court, has a 96% score on their scorecard, a narrative score of 30, and they have spent 65% of their budget as of the end of Q7.
I noticed on this it looks like participants come to court every 4 weeks, which seems longer than it should be, but maybe that's just a misstatement of something.
We definitely, I believe that ties back into some of the feedback that we have, but we can make sure that we
Oh, I
are
see.
making
Okay.
note.
It's hard sometimes to remember which ones tie into which of your recommendations.
Yes, it is, Annie. Yes, it is. There's a lot of going cross-eyed in the past couple of weeks as I tried to line these up. Anything else for Lane? All right, we'll move on to Marion there. So Marion is in that middle bucket. They had a scorecard score of 89%, a narrative score of 29, and they had spent 63% of their budget at the end of Q7. Any feedback for Marion? All right, we'll head on over to our final VTC, and that's Multnomah County's Veterans Treatment Court. They had a scorecard score of 75% with a narrative score of 31. Now they are new to the grant. They're a new court. And so we obviously don't have any spending information. They also don't have an average participation yet or any completion yet, but they do have a capacity of 25.
In the Veterans Treatment Court, do they have providers specially trained to work with veterans?
They do. I'm going to let Rachel speak to that because I think I know, but as our expert.
I actually would love to defer to you. Connie, thank you for asking this question. It is absolutely core in specifically the VTC model is really understanding military culture and that service member and veteran population that is coming with so many different cultural needs and also potentially service needs. So absolutely, yes, there is a high emphasis on training specifically for this population, including the treatment modalities and services that are offered to those individuals, along with lots of specific roles that are targeted towards this group. For example, veteran justice outreach workers from the VA. So very much there is a high lens on looking at this group specifically. I'd say it's one of the most unique of all of our program types.
All right. Any other feedback for Multnomah? All right. Well, folks, we can't get enough of her. Rachel's coming back one more time. We are now down to our final court type. So we're going to hear from Rachel. Tell us a few things about the DUI treatment courts.
Thank you. And hooray for our DUI treatment court programs. We only have 2 in our state, although we hope that they proliferate over the next few years because they're fantastic programs. As of now, we have 2. They're in Multnomah and Clackamas County. And I say that because, of course, we wanted to be consistent and showing trends by program types, but I also wanted to flag for you all that it's really hard to hit a trend when you're only looking at 2 programs. That's a very small sample size. Probably more beneficial to just look at each of their programmatic trends and kind of dissect what's happening in their individual communities. And that's all I've got for you. Thank you for letting me join you all today.
Excellent. Any questions about DUI courts? All right. So as mentioned a couple of times, we just have the 2. Based on their scores, we just skipped that first bucket. So we're going to start with Multnomah's in that kind of standard analysis bucket. They had a score of 89% on their scorecard, a narrative score of 32, and they had spent about 55% of their budget by the end of Q7. You can see it there. Any feedback for Multnomah's DUI court? All right, so we'll move along. Next up is Clackamas County DUI Court. They had a scorecard score of 79%, a narrative score of 24, and they had spent 76% of their budget at the end of Q7. Now they had a completion rate of 79%, a participation average of 26, and a capacity for 50.
I had a note here and I'm trying to find where it was in reference to, but I wrote down that they tend to have or want a higher BAC for entry because these are all courts aimed at kind of repeat offenders or things of that nature. And I was curious about, with the increase of substance use and other types of DUIs, kind of if there's any trends or kind of acknowledgement of how we might handle or how courts are looking at, you know, other types of DUIs and how those don't carry BACs and might impact eligibility criteria. So more of a random question, not necessarily pertinent to what they're doing.
But a great question for sure. I definitely am not a subject matter expert on this, so I am going to look to Rachel Mark to see if she has anything she wants to add to that.
Yeah, the target population for the DUI treatment court programs is actually is distinct from other treatment court types. So there is typically you're looking at multiple DUIs, and in this context, the individuals are high risk for more DUIs. We're not necessarily just looking at recidivism specific. Like generally, it's really targeted towards this specific behavior that, of course, we know is such a high public safety risk. So usually that comes in a package of multiple DUIs. Your chronic offenders, so I don't like the word offenders. And there also, I think, are sometimes pathways for incredibly high BACs because, as you can imagine, somebody who is capable of operating a vehicle with a really high BAC is likely somebody who has a substantial tolerance, indicating that they have probably a pretty substantial need for substance use interventions as well. So I think that it's a nice kind of pathway in that doesn't totally balk with the guidance around how to identify the right target population for this group. Great catch, Annie.
Did Annie, was your question about substance use? Because you can have a DUI that has no BAC if it's related to drugs.
And any type of altered would qualify. Sorry, I was zooming in on the BAC piece. So that's one of the parts of it. But yeah, they're not exclusively for alcohol use disorders.
Yeah, no, that is helpful. And an interesting kind of component I hadn't thought of was when your BAC is that high, it is an indication of a lot of other things.
Did I miss their eligibility criteria? I noticed Multnomah County had a pretty short and sweet eligibility criteria, but did I miss it in Clackamas County?
Let's go back. Oh, yeah, you're asking about Clackamas County or Multnomah County?
Yeah, I'm looking in their total package submitted. I didn't see eligibility criteria, but I did for Multnomah County.
So the suggestion and the reason we're giving them the feedback was the not allowing participation if previously unsuccessful in the program is not best practices. So that is why that was there.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Anything else for Clackamas? And thank you, Rachel, for answering that question. And thank you, Annie, for asking it. What a great question. All right, I'm seeing a thumb. Folks, you did it. That's all our courts. That is all 59 applications. So great job. Again, I just cannot stress how much I appreciate you all joining us as GRC members, the width and breadth of your experience. As you can see, you gave us a lot of feedback that we would have missed otherwise, and we're so grateful for it because that all comes together and will hopefully help our courts as we move forward through this process. So I did want to just real quick before I let you go and give you back your Friday afternoon, wanted to just kind of go over next steps, if you will. So what will happen is we are going to take the CJC staff recommendations along with your additional recommendations. We will put them into feedback letters that will be sent to each appropriate court team along with their scorecard. So they will get a feedback letter that lists everything that were on these slides, as well as their scorecards. And then they're going to use those feedback letters and scorecards to construct a budget request that that's a word on a Friday afternoon, operationalizes the standards. So I will, when we open the final application after we open the final application, I'll be presenting a webinar to provide general guidance, answer questions, etc. And then we essentially do the process that we did with the narratives with the budgets. So CJC staff will review the budget requests and make recommendations. Then you all, the GRC, will come back together to provide further recommendations on those budget requests. And then I will bring those recommendations that you all have made to the commission, and the commission is the group that gets to make the final say. They will have the final decisions based on those recommendations. Now, a couple things about that. One, Shelby, my coworker, sent out a doodle poll a while ago about when we can all come together for that GRC meeting. If you have not filled it out yet, if you will do so and submit it as soon as possible, that would be great. We know you're busy and we want to make sure that we get it on the calendar. And then secondly, I just, again, real quick, before we get to public comment, want to just give a shout out to the team that is behind me, metaphorically, at the CJC. When I tell you that, like, this may be the face you see, but definitely the work that has gone into bringing all this information to you is a lot more than just me. I would be off screen and probably in a different country, fleeing this process if I did not have them. So just shout out to the treatment court team at the CJC, because they're the best. I might be biased, but that's the only place I can be biased in this process. So with that, I will open it up to public comment if we have any. But before we do that, go ahead, Connie.
What do we need to read it to prepare for next week, for Wednesday?
For Wednesday?
Don't
Oh,
have any-
I'm so glad you brought that up. Nothing. So the great news is we have gotten through everything that we were planning on getting through. So for those, I bet Jake can speak to this. This review process used to take, to my understanding, upwards of 3 days. So it has gotten a lot faster now. So you're off the hook. You have your Wednesday back on the 21st. And we will come together again at our next GRC meeting. Of course, I will be in touch before then with all of you, giving you that answer to the question that we're going to wait for OJD to talk to their legal team about, so I can give you that information, as well as some information regarding scheduling for the GRC, the budget discussion after the final application.
Okay.
No, I'm so
Thank
glad
you.
you said that. Yeah, please don't come. You have your Wednesday back. You're free. Yeah, Jake.
I just wanted to echo your shout out to the work being done behind the scenes. I can remember my first grant review. It was 2 full days in Salem in person, and to where we are today and the streamlining. Kudos to you, Adeline, and your team. This is a much smoother process than what we went through before, and how we got here is all the hard work you guys have done. So thank you.
Well, thanks. All right. Well, with that, we're going to open it up to public comment for real. Just a friendly reminder, should any member of the public want to make a comment, please keep them to comments, not questions. We can't answer them, we being the CJC staff or GRC. And a friendly reminder to keep it around 2 minutes. And I am going to double check on the back end. I don't think we had any requests for public comment that I know of.
My public folder comment came up empty, so I'm assuming there was none.
There was some written commentary that was made available for the GRC that should be on that Google Drive. When Shelby did reinstate that link. I don't know, Melissa, if you were able to get into it the second time. Yep, so it should be working. You should be able to see it there.
My folder's blank.
Interesting.
I was able to see it, but I can't open it. I had
went
to
ahead
go.
and downloaded it and opened it, but the Word document's blank.
Yeah, I opened it, but my document's blank.
Okay. Well, how about this? What I'll do is I'll make sure that you will get a new copy, and we'll make sure that it gets to you when we send that other information regarding I'm so sorry, I can't remember who asked it, the question around marijuana and any other upcoming information as well, if that works. It is showing up on our end. I'm getting notifications, so we'll figure it out. Foiled by technology right at the end of the meeting. We were so close. All right. I don't think we have any other interest in public comment. So with that, again, thank you all so much for being here. Unless you have any other questions for me, I will let you go. Enjoy the rest of your Friday. Thanks so much for spending such a large chunk of it with us today and reviewing these applications. And we'll go from there. Take care.